I think this goes to the point of head in the oven and feet in the refrigerator, right? Because it is these averages that everyone's talking about. If I were to characterize globally the exact same things that you've talked about locally, I would start with the fact that deleveraging is painful, and it takes time, and it's not pretty. And that's what's happening around the world. And deleveraging hits people unequally, and we'll talk about that. The second would be beware Europe. If you think Springfield is a mess, and even within Europe, there are tremendous differences amongst what's happening in the economies there, but beware Europe. The third is that living within your means and creating organic growth takes a new way of thinking about things, a new mindset, and different tools than living on financial leverage. And the last piece of that is globalization, which is a huge theme and has really driven a lot of the growth that we've seen in the past several years. We are seeing the downside of globalization, and that is as cheap labor is available, it can buy more stuff when it has more stuff, and when it doesn't, we are using people to adjust things that have happened in capital markets, and that is fundamentally wrong. So this bifurcation, in my opinion, is truly a global phenomenon. It's happening at the economic level for cities and towns and states and countries that have some of the positive dynamics that we've just heard about. It's happening at the company level, which you were referring to, where there's really a huge difference between the companies that get it, that live within their means, that have kept their workforces, that are training their people, that have a differentiated product capability, that are living within their means and have cash. And quite frankly, it's happening at the human level. That's what Occupy Whatever is about, right? The difference between those who did not have debt, those who, whether that's the upper 1% or 2% or 6%, we can talk about all that. But the reality is the haves and have-nots have become much more noticeable in this cycle around the world, and especially in this country, than has happened in a very, very long time. So I think this theme, and there's lots more I can say about that, is really important, and it's important for investors, it's important for governments, and it's important for people who run companies.
I want to drill down a bit on just one point that you had brought up, and that is the problems in Europe.
Yeah.
It seems like they never end, Carol, that they can't get to a resolution. That every time I do an interview, another economist will say, well, it's at least a few more years.
Right. Or maybe never.
Or maybe never.
Look, this is a complex, complex issue. I've done huge amounts of reading on it. You would all be sound asleep and had several scotches by the time we went through the details of this. What is happening in Europe, the mechanisms that they're trying to use to save the system, the way that the capital flows are happening, I mean, it is complex beyond complex. And I don't think we want to or need to get into that. I boil this down to three very simple ways of looking about it, right? One, we all were in a mess together, right? It was a global recession. Like Boston and Weston and Dover, and by the way, that's self-selecting, right? If you live in Weston and Dover and you're unemployed, you don't live in Weston and Dover for very long. So that's, but that aside, the second side of that is that, like those towns, you did not have recessions in much of the emerging world, especially China. And the Chinese economy is humming along extremely well, thank you very much. Again, we can talk about the details. Are the numbers real? Are they controlling it? Are we going to have hyperinflation? Yeah, nah. But the fact is it's gone from like 12 and 10% growth to 8 or 9% growth. That's still not bad for the second largest economy in the world. So, the emerging countries have gotten through this pretty darn well. They are back above the levels of where they were pre-recession. Their problem is they need access to capital. They need credit to grow, just like small companies need credit to grow. They can't get credit because most of the credit that they've gotten comes out of European banks primarily, American banks secondarily. Okay? So what's happening in the emerging economies is they're beginning to slow because their production's going down. There's not the demand around the world out of Europe, and they can't get access to capital because the European bank system's shutting down. But they have to continue to print money. They have to continue to borrow money, and the emerging economies, I believe, in aggregate, not all of them, we'll get through this relatively well. The United States is as good as it gets. I mean, if you like this, this is good, because this is about as good as it's going to get for a while, in my opinion. And that is that our economy is picking up tremendously. Our economy is doing very, very well underneath what is a horrible downshift. We are still not yet quite back. We're almost back to where we were pre-recession levels, pre-crisis levels. In a normal recession, we would be 5 to 10% above those levels at this point, right? So while it may be better than it was, it ain't good, but it's hanging in there. And we've been able to shift all of this debt to our federal government system, which has slowed down both the rate of recovery but also the rate of decline. We print money as a living. We're going to continue to print money as a living. And at the end of the day, the only way to get out of this is to reflate our way out of this slowly over time, which is what we're trying to do. But the U.S. has the power both of its internal markets, its external markets, and the ability to print money. So while it's not pretty, we'll get through it. Europe doesn't have either what the emerging markets have or what the U.S. has. They don't have the growth. They don't have the access to capital. They can't print money because it's not the same type of system as in the U.S. Yeah, Germany can print them. We can get into the mechanistics of that, but they really can't print money the way the U.S. can. And so they are going to have austerity programs and increases in fiscal policies to get them out of this situation, and it is going to take a really long time. I believe Europe is on the verge of another recession and perhaps another depression. The unemployment rate in Spain is 25%. The unemployment rate in Italy, God only knows because no one counts. And Germany has begun to slow down for the first time in a really long time, and Germany just about is tipping into a recession as we speak. That will not be helpful for Europe. So when you ask the question, I think it's a really complex issue, but if you break it down sort of into this emerging market, doing pretty well, the United States slowing, not so great, where it is, you better like what you got, and Europe, like, hold on to your hat, because it could get really ugly, and the uglier it gets in Europe, the tougher it is for the emerging markets and for the U.S.